I want to talk to you about lettuce. More lettuce. I had done this before yesterday's message, but I went through my Bible and looked at all the let us passages. And what I marveled at is there are a whole lot of these just in Hebrews alone. Turn in your Bibles to Hebrews 4. Let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. There's one, let us. Read down again the 11th verse. Let us labor, therefore, to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief, which is not a pistis word. Well, there's some verses that when I teach on, I'll do them in translation, in complete translation, to show a different word is being used. And 4:14, seeing then that we have a great high priest that is passed into the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. And again in verse 16, let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in a time of need. And spin forward to Hebrews 6. We're looking at all the lettuce that's in Hebrews. Therefore, leaving the principles of the doctrine of Christ, let us go on to perfection, unto perfection, completion. Turn to Hebrews 10, verse 22. Let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. And again in verse 23, let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. Verse 24, and let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works. Now, there may be more. I circled the ones that I saw right away in the 12th chapter. In the first verse, there's two of them. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run. Just a whole lot of lettuce. It's like nobody knows who's in heaven. 12:28. Wherefore we, receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace, whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. 13:13. Let us go forth, therefore, unto him without the camp, bearing his reproach. In verse 15, by him, therefore, let us offer the sacrifice of praise to God continually, that is, the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. That's a whole lot of lettuce in one book. I went through and was looking at all these, but something caught my eye. If you'll turn back to the 4th chapter, something caught my eye there. I was curious to know, as some of you that are learning Hebrew with me, and we do grammar, and we're learning different building blocks to that language, I was curious to know what the King James was doing, what the translators were doing when they were translating let us. Let us. What was behind that? And this is what's so interesting. I just took the ones out of the 4th chapter. And, for example, the first one, let us therefore fear. I just wrote the key word, but let me get it from the... So we have here the let us fear is in one word in the Greek from the word we get phobia from. Phobe thomen. Phobe, say that three times. Phobe thomen. Un. That's the therefore. Un is the therefore. But this word, the phobia word, let us fear in one word, is, and all of these are the same. They're all, I shouldn't say they're the same, but they're all verbs in the subjunctive, the mood of possibility, or possibility, permissiveness, etc. So there, that is why we have that let us. I was kind of bothered by how they arrived at that, and of course then the grammar makes sense. But what was interesting was each one of these, that how the grammar functions, giving a little bit of clarity. For example, in Hebrews 4:1, the let us therefore fear is, as I said, a verb, subjunctive, aorist, but it's a passive deponent. Now in the Greek, you have voice. You've got active voice, you've got middle voice, and you've got passive voice. Active voice, the subject is acting, doing the action. In the passive voice, it is receiving, and in the middle voice, it is doing it for itself. We may sometimes say reflexively. But when you encounter something called a deponent, it means there's lacking an active voice to it. It's active in its meaning. The sense of it is active, but it's passive in form. So I thought, I'm going to look at all these and consider, are these all the same? And surely enough, they weren't. That's what I found so fascinating. All lettuce is not the same. So the first one is aorist. And aorist usually for the Greek deals with something that is in the past sense, historical past sense, if you will, and passive. And then if I move down to verse 11, that is also one word, being a let us, spudesomen. And spudesomen un, there's your therefore. Let us labor. And if you want a little bit of color on that word, to make an effort, to be prompt, earnest, diligent, to endeavor, and also to study. That's one of the definitions of the word. This word in verse 11 is subjunctive, mood of possibility, aorist, placing it historically in the past, but also active. That's what I found fascinating. So we have, in the first one, let us therefore fear. And in the second one, let us labor therefore to enter into that rest. Verse 11 is an active activity of faith, if you will. Verse 1, which we'll call it more of an attitude. That's the best way to describe it because of the voice factor in the passive deponent. It's more of an attitude. This says, let us fear. lest a promise being left of us entering into his rest. Any promise. A promise, any promise. It's more of an attitude. And the grammar helps to kind of give that coloration for us to discern between, as I said, not all lettuce is the same. What about verse 14? Let us hold fast our profession. There is something equally interesting, another angle here. Here we have a verb that is in the mood of possibility again, subjunctive, but it's in the present and active, which means this is ongoing. Let us hold fast our profession. It's ongoing and it's active. It is continuous. Now, I like looking at these, sometimes just isolating words, because when you go back to read and you make these small notes, sometimes it helps give a little bit deeper meaning to the text that you're reading. Now, the last one in this 4th chapter is kind of interesting. Let us therefore come boldly unto the throne of grace. Here you've got the same thing, a verb, subjunctive, present, which is ongoing, in the now, and ongoing, continuous, and middle deponent, which lends to the fact that we do this act for ourselves. You know, there's such great subtlety in language. We don't need an intercessor to go to the throne for us. We are told that's what we are to do. The middle deponent lets me know that's my activity and your activity. But present is ongoing. I know you all know this, how much I love grammar, but I love making these notes in my Bible. And when I go back to read, it becomes clear to me when I start off in the 4th chapter, let us therefore fear. It's not speaking of fear as in the phobia of cowering, but of an attitude, a mindset. Here is a book full of promises for me to take hold of. I've heard a lot of people teach on entering into his rest, but it makes it pretty clear that the rest that is being spoken of here is promise obtained. And you don't stop on that promise that you've obtained. You keep reaching for the next one and the next one and the next one. That's the whole life of faith. But here is the beginning point is an attitude. And if you think about it, it ties in so perfectly when you understand it like that based on the grammar. It ties in so perfectly with those who in apistis, in disfaith, in reverse, going the wrong way, could not enter in. It's almost like saying, let's have an attitude adjustment here. Adjust your mind. The phobia isn't, I'm scared, I'm afraid. Adjust your mind. Lest a promise, any promise being left, I can't add to this except to say it gives coloration, attitude. The next one that I just gave the example in verse 11, let us labor therefore. I love the fact that it's almost like building blocks. Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief, which is not a pistis. I keep saying that. But again, mood of possibility. And here we're dealing with something we actively do. And it's an activity of faith. And as you move through this again, let us hold fast to our profession. And I wish they didn't translate that either that way, but that is ongoing and active. So you can see there's kind of this building momentum as we read inside the chapter. There's a building momentum going on. I should also give you the Strong's for let us hold fast of verse 14, because I wrote them down here. That word is kratomen, to use strength, to seize, to retain, to keep, to lay hold of, to obtain, to retain. And that's that same word that always pops up everywhere. In verse 14, homologes, which is what is sometimes translated confession, proclamation, profession, and thanks. Which I am convinced that one day I will sit down and write what exactly it is that bothers me about this word. But profession is a terrible use of this word that I've said to you many times. Homo, same, and logiais, from the word. Same word, same as the word. I wish I could make a new translation of that word and insert it everywhere it occurs in the Bible. Just because of all those people out there that are hung up on the confess Jesus thing, which is its own, I covered that, it feels like 50,000 times over. But then somebody else will come out and talk about profession or confession, and they got it all wrong. But that's for another time. I'm interested in the lettuce tonight. And I'm not talking about salad. I love the fact that you could just pick, of course, in English you've got multiple words. Let us, therefore. But even that last one is boldly, therefore come boldly. And that's simply, that's pretty close or decent translation in the King James, to approach, to come near, to worship under the throne of grace. You are doing that on an ongoing basis and for yourself. So somebody says to you, well, what's in verse 4? Well, there's a lot of stuff in verse 4. I just chose to isolate the lettuce of chapter 4, not verse 4, but of chapter 4. I just chose to isolate those words. And you could probably pick apart and find, for example, there's another fascinating study that as we get into this chapter, I'll reach into, and I've already done it, but I will bring it out and share it with you. And it's on the rest, the word rest, and how that is being used here, and how if people would take the time to see the use of it here, it does not mean death. I've heard it described as death. I've heard it described as sleep. We're talking the promise obtained, the rest promised obtained, ceasing, it says, from, as he ceased from his work, it is the life of faithing and obtaining that which God has promised. And I wish more people would just gravitate towards this instead of all the other stuff, because that is the momentum of your faith. You keep reaching for the next one. You reach for the next one. And it's not like, oh, well, I've obtained, and now I quit moving. If you've obtained and you quit reaching for the next one, you die. The life of faith is ongoing, and the momentum is ongoing. It's a movement forward. So that's all the let us in chapter 4. I have one more let us, but it's just a very simple let us. Turn to Galatians 6. I told you, there's so many great things you could study in the Bible. This is the best one to end, the best note to end on. Galatians 6 and verse 9. And let us not be weary in well-doing. That's the best. The best let us is kept for the last here. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. To those in the context of what's being said in the text, and outside of that as well. You think that there's a good connection between the let us of Galatians 6:9 and the let us of Hebrews 4. Keep faithing. Keep faithing. And let us not be weary in well-doing. Keep faithing. If you are flip-flopping between books, one of the last, second to last one, if we keep faithing to our, what's that word I said, profession. Yeah, keep faithing. So this is, in your own time, you may want to just look up all these, what I call the famous lettuces of the Bible. And you find that it makes for some good, faith-stirring, tie a few things together here, but this last one does it for me. I would read the context, of course, in the sowing and the reaping. But I think it's a general application that goes straight through the Bible. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. And I would just say to you, that goes as a universal principle. Sometimes I do get tired. Sometimes I wish it was a little bit easier. Then I realize that all these things, God has given an opportunity to you and to me, and you must and I must seize those opportunities. Keep faithing. Keep faithing. Keep faithing. Keep faithing. That means you who have a lack of connectivity or a lack of faith, I'm sure you'll be the same ones that will not pick up the phone tonight and you won't make a reservation. You won't call in a commitment. But those who have heard tonight and are part of the let us, I love the fact that Paul and whoever wrote Hebrews, whoever is attributed to, includes themselves, the preacher, and the intended hearers in the congregation in the us factor. Let us. So let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Keep faithing. I'm faithing to believe those reservations and commitments for the month and new King's houses and King's tithers to be called in tonight. So here's the faith opportunity. Get on the telephone.
Come to his house.